What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on a Monday, February 24th, 2025. Glad to have you guys along. Thanks for being here for another episode of the pod. We got a recruiting heavy episode for you guys here. It's the dead period, but over the weekend, we got hit with a significant amount of news. So we got some more that we can kind of sink our teeth into and dissect here on the Ducks Dish podcast. And joining me as always is ScoopDuck owner and publisher J Hop. J Hop, how we doing?
Good. We're how it is. We're rocking and rolling on a Monday. I know we were just talking about it, but there's a ton of news, and we told people, hey, don't check out until August. You're gonna miss, the meat and potatoes, if you will, of recruiting, and that's exactly what's going on. Guys are committing, decommitting. Visit lists are taking shape. Like this is if you like following recruiting, this is the funnest time of the year.
We are certainly building to a really busy time with spring visits being announced, official visits being announced, like you mentioned, and we usually see a majority of Oregon's recruiting class filled out by the time the season starts. So couldn't have said it better than myself. This is the time to be rocking with us over at ScoopDuck. And if you're listening to us or watching us here on the YouTube channel, definitely would appreciate you guys subscribing. But head on over to ScoopDuck.com. You can try us out for a whole week for just $1, and we got a bunch of great stories over there. So Justin, let's kind of rip the Band-Aid off here. The big story of the weekend was 2026 quarterback Jonas Williams flipping his commitment from Oregon to USC in the first USC recruiting win over Oregon. Can you hear me okay, Justin? Sorry about that.
There we go. I'm sorry. It lagged out pretty hard, but I'm back.
Okay. It might have happened on my end too, but just get to that was the point I was getting to. Is just Jonas Williams flipping from Oregon to USC. Felt like kind of a matter of when, not if, certainly over the last week or so. So what was your kind of initial reaction to this news?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, if we'll just call maybe a casual, a fan's going to look at that, and whether you're an Oregon or USC fan, if you're an Oregon fan, you'd be like, oh no, this is a huge blow. I was not expecting this. And if you're a USC fan, a casual fan, you look at this and think, oh man, Lincoln Riley's, stuffing Dan Lanning into a locker or whatever. And the reality is this, once Oregon became a legitimate threat for Jared Curtis, this was 100% on the table. Maybe not necessarily USC, but Jonas Williams, maybe deciding to decommit or, commit to another school. So, USC and LSU seem to be the two that took advantage of that news. And at the end of the day, those who know and follow realize, hey, this has a lot to do with Jared Curtis and where Oregon stands with him. And by no means does that make Jared Curtis a lock to Oregon. That's not what this means. But it's clear you weren't going to end up with Curtis and Jonas Williams in this class. Williams did what he thought was best for himself and his recruitment. Good player, good get for USC, good get for Lincoln Riley. And there's no doubt that they have, quote unquote, gotten their shit together on the recruiting trail. They are, really doing a bang up job of recruiting guys in the state of California right now. And, you have to give them credit. They were down so bad for so long. They kind of had nowhere to go but up. So Oregon's going to be fine. Oregon's in great shape. This is a good pickup for USC. But the reality is, Oregon's looking to potentially upgrade at their quarterback position in recruiting with Jared Curtis. And so if you're a Duck fan, I guess just cross your fingers and hope the Curtis thing happens.
And from my perspective, Justin, I haven't had a chance to interview Jonas Williams, so I haven't really gotten a chance to kind of get his approach and thoughts on everything. But what we can say is this: he committed in August of last year, and Oregon continued to pursue multiple quarterbacks, whether that's Jared Curtis, who we're going to talk about plenty on today's episode, or Ryder Lyons. And those are two top guys in the 2026 class. And maybe that rubbed him the wrong way. I'm not saying it did, but there's a possibility that is part of what played into this. And I don't think that should come as a huge surprise because Oregon has kind of been, for lack of a better phrase, QB greedy recently. And you can't blame them for that because your task as a coaching staff is to get as many elite players as you possibly can. And sometimes the reality is that means more than one quarterback. So I'm not saying that that's the reason that this happened into it a little bit. We didn't see just make his way out to Oregon for the Ducks junior day in January, but he did visit USC for their junior day here at the beginning of February. So I think that that's a huge pickup for them. If there's one position we know USC is going to have a really, really good time recruiting or not struggle to recruit, it's quarterbacks because of what Lincoln Riley has done with the position during his career as a college coach. So not a huge surprise, and I definitely echo the sentiment that you have with Oregon's going to be just fine.
Well, just looking at the transfer portal as a whole, what's one position you can fulfill almost every single cycle with either a bona fide dude or somebody that might come in and be really good and transfer in and be good in 2 years? I mean, it's quarterback, right? So to me, right now, I look at Oregon's roster and, we all assume, myself included, Dante Moore is going to be the starter for this season. And potentially Dante Moore could be the starter for the next 2 seasons for Oregon. So, right now, what happens in that window of the next 2 years, if you will, to me is like, okay, fine. They get Jared Curtis. That's great. They lose Jonas Williams. No big deal. There's a lot of options. So quarterback's one where I don't think you need to panic. You just kind of let the chips fall. And we know that Dan Lanning knows more than anyone how important that position is to any team, especially his team at Oregon, to have quarterbacks coming in. So, yeah, I'd love to see some prep quarterbacks coming in and getting developed. But at the end of the day, it's not like Bo Nix was a terrible transfer. It's not like Dylan Gabriel was a terrible transfer. And we currently feel pretty good about Dante Moore being a good transfer. So just, let the chips roll. This is one blip. If Oregon gets Jared Curtis, that's great. Certainly makes it look like they're probably set up for the next 4 to 5 years, potentially, if that's the case with the guys they have on the roster now. And then with him coming in behind it potentially. So we'll see. This becomes something that doesn't impact next season or even possibly 2 seasons. This is, a little bit more down the road. So we'll trust the staff has plenty of time to get this right.
And I'm very much in the camp of wanting to see prep quarterbacks developed at Oregon or any other school. But the sport is at a point right now where virtually all of the top tier programs have transfer quarterbacks leading the way. So you're going to continue to recruit really, really good high school quarterbacks with, I think, the assumption that a lot of them probably aren't going to stick around or you're going to go into the portal to find another quarterback. I think if you were to ask Will Stein right now, he'd love to have a just, laundry list of 5-star quarterbacks in his room to work with. But by the time those guys are ready, it's usually the timelines don't really line up. I think you kind of have to make a serious push or statement in your first 2 years. That's been a huge topic for me with a lot of my stuff this offseason. If you're not making a roll in the first 2 years or so, you're probably going to look for somewhere else. And then at that point, the staff's probably bringing in a different guy. So it's just a really curious development of college football recruiting over the past couple of years. And hope my not too bad. I don't know why it seems like it's struggling today, but I think we're hanging in there. It seems like Oregon and USC have always been major recruiting rivals on the trail, but following that Chad Savage hire, USC's made some really good moves as far as hiring guys this offseason. And I know that Chad Bowden's a huge piece of what they're doing right now, and he's a Midwest guy, so it didn't shock me at all to see that Jonas Williams quickly started trending to USC after that hire kind of got finalized, and then he got on campus. So I think Oregon's really set up to succeed for the long term now, and we're seeing USC benefit from making a lot of the same moves that Oregon made front office-wise when Dan Lanning got hired.
Well, let's be realistic about something. USC was terrible, has been terrible under Lincoln Riley at recruiting. They've been terrible. The reality is this, though. USC was never going to stay down forever, right? I mean, it's just too big of a sleeping giant. They're a blue blood. They've been around. It's one of the most storied football programs of the last 30 years. Obviously, they haven't been on the winning side as much as they used to be, but it's still USC, right? You should literally, if you're Lincoln Riley, you should be able to roll out of bed in the morning and land 10 kids that make your program infinitely better. And in this 2026 class, you should be able to roll out of bed and hit 25 kids that, infinitely make your program better. So, like you said, those hires were key. Whether they woke him up or whether he woke himself up and said, hey, I do need to fix this and get better, doesn't matter. They've gotten better. And again, they were never going to stay down forever. Oregon did a really good job taking advantage of the few years that they weren't recruiting the way they should have. And now it just becomes a little bit more of a competition. Let's face it, okay? Who's probably Oregon is impacted by USC's improvement, but the ones that are probably going to be even more impacted are going to be Texas A&M and Alabama and the schools in the SEC footprint that were able to come out and recruit the state of California way better than they should have been able to. Those are guys now that, those programs will have a really tough time peeling away from USC and Oregon, because before it was just them versus Oregon. So we'll see. Oregon's going to be fine. It was expected that USC would get better. They definitely are. So no disrespect to them. And now we'll just be shaping up for some of those good old classic battles that, that we kind of enjoyed through the years when it was Oregon versus USC. And lately it's been all Oregon, but, USC is making an attempt to claw back into it now.
We'll have more on a potential Oregon versus USC battle in just a little bit here on the Ducks Dish podcast. But let's transition into our next topic, Justin. I don't think it is a coincidence at all that right on the heels of this Jonas Williams flip news, the number one quarterback in the 2026 class, Jared Curtis out of Nashville, Tennessee, announced that he was down to Oregon and Georgia. No decision date set just yet, but he has set both of his official visits to Oregon and Georgia, respectively. You got Oregon on June 6th and Georgia on June 13th. Important to remember here, Curtis was a one-time Georgia commit. So, of course, the Bulldogs have stuck around and loomed large in his recruitment. But on the heels of this news, I have to say that I feel pretty good about Oregon's chances right now. I'm not ready to put in a Jared Curtis Oregon prediction just yet, but I think that Oregon's not going to be left empty-handed at quarterback, and we have known for months now that they are right there in the thick of it for Jared Curtis, and that news over the weekend just really legitimized it. Yeah,
in my experience on this, 46 years of being on this planet, there's very few coincidences, right? I mean, for Oregon to lose Jonas Williams, and like you said, less than 24 hours later, we have a new top two from Jared Curtis, which is Oregon and Georgia. That's quite a coincidence. So, I think that was by design. And I do think that, Curtis is probably Oregon's guy to lose today. And I felt that way for a while, but I've also said on the heels of that, I've said it multiple times and I will say it again. This kid's from Tennessee. Okay. Last I checked, Tennessee's a long ways from Eugene, Oregon. And that's okay. Like Oregon's winning some of these battles here, but Georgia's a lot closer. Distance always becomes an issue late in the window. Okay. So Oregon could lead this thing for 90 to 95% of the way. And that last 5% or whatever, when it becomes real, like, hey, I'm about to make a commitment. I'm about to, spend Thanksgiving and Christmas 2,500 miles away from home. My parents are going to have to hop on an 8-hour, 6-8 hour flight, whatever, to come and see me play. Those things add up and take a toll. So again, I'm just cautioning Duck fans here. Don't write him on the commit list. Don't write him in ink. Don't jinx yourself. But, let's be real. I think Oregon leads here. I don't think it was a coincidence. The top two came out immediately after the Jonas Williams news. And he's got these visits lined up. I know he's talking about official visits in June, but as I look at my calendar, it's February 24th. I got a sneaking suspicion this guy does not remain uncommitted by June. I think you'll see him take, some very key unofficial visits that'll, be very close to official visits. And I think this guy probably ends up making this decision before June. If he does, additionally, A, that's nice for him because it kind of gets the monkey off his back of recruiting. But B, it also allows him to become a recruiter for whichever school he picks in that very important month of June with guys taking visits to either Oregon or Georgia. So I think those are some things that you'll see take shape. And I do think this guy's probably on more of like a 2-month calendar in terms of making a commitment.
I could certainly see that being the case. I think especially with the quarterback position, things have a funny way of getting accelerated timeline wise. And the both schools are definitely going to be applying pressure here after getting him on campus. So I totally agree with you. I think that this is a guy that's probably going to be getting back to Oregon sooner rather than later, certainly for a spring practice. Important to remember, too, that Oregon still, as of this recording, has their spring game scheduled for April 26th. So knock on wood that doesn't get canceled as we're seeing with some of these other major programs. But I guess over the last week or so, I'm feeling more confident that it's going to end up happening just because it's already been scheduled and things are kind of in motion. But I'm not Dan Lanning. I couldn't tell you that right now. So the fact that Oregon has done a great job recruiting quarterbacks and developing quarterbacks, even if they're from the transfer portal, mind you, these past couple of years, I think certainly bodes well for them. If we're just comparing Oregon and Georgia directly at the quarterback position these past few years, I think you'd probably give the edge to Oregon after we saw what Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel did when they were both in Eugene. So I'm not saying that Oregon's flat out better than Georgia overall. I'm just saying that over these past couple of years, Oregon's ammo in a recruitment like this has, I think, gotten better significantly. So Will Stein's done a great job at Oregon, and we know that Dan Lanning is a great closer of a recruiter as well. So this is a recruitment that's going to be fun to watch. And I think that I can't help but think to some degree that there was a reason that he decommitted from Georgia. I don't know what that was, but I have to think that that's going to be running through his mind a little bit here as he weighs both of these options.
Well, yeah. First thing I want to hit on is Oregon's not going to cancel their spring game. I don't think Oregon will ever cancel its spring game. I shouldn't say
hope not. I really hope not. I'm not trying to put it out there.
Dan Lanning won't. He won't. He first off, they've already, hit the nail on the head having the spring game after the spring portal transfer window closes. So if you're not smart enough to figure that out as a university, I don't know what to tell you. You do it the day after it closes, and it is what it is. It's really a non-issue. Secondly, I know that, look, the spring game's already been watered down enough, and that's just the way it goes. Like, they continue to get watered down. It's not even a glorified scrimmage. Like, a glorified scrimmage gives way more than the spring game does, and I understand why. And it's fine. It doesn't matter. Fans are still excited to go. He knows what the spring game means to the city of Eugene, to the fans of Oregon. He's not going to take that away. And again, they've already kind of fixed the problem because they have it after the spring game. Anyways, my rant there is done. And I like, it pisses me off that these other schools are too lazy to figure out, because the spring game like embodies college football to me, right? Like, it's a spring game. It's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to show up. You're supposed to bring your family. You're getting a very watered down game, but you don't care. You get to go watch your team. You get to see the next wave of young guys come in. That's all that matters. It's good for the team. It's good for the fans. And it's just like, it pisses me off these guys are canceling. But on the heels of Curtis, one thing I'll say, getting back to what you were talking about, I think the fact that he's narrowed this down to 2 schools will ultimately allow him to put much more focus on those 2 schools. So instead of taking phone calls and whatnot from 4 or 5 schools and really kind of exhausting yourself talking to all these coaches, you've got 2 schools now that you can say, okay, I'm really going to dive in and get to the pros and cons of Oregon and the pros and cons of Georgia. And what that ultimately means is that I think he'll be able to speed up his timeline in terms of making a commitment. So that's kind of what I think. And I do think that, it will be made aware to him, if it's not already, that, hey, man, whether you're a duck or a dog, it would be very valuable to have you helping us recruit in that month of June, which quite frankly is now the biggest month of recruiting in the whole calendar year. Like, I know that everybody signs in December, but ultimately most of your work is done by the time you hit December. June, with those official visits, is now the go month, if you will, in recruiting.
It certainly is. It's always been a busy June. And then we see decisions coming on the heels of that month in July when things are dead, but people can still make their decisions. So going to be interesting to see what happens with Jared Curtis. Ryder Lyons, of course, is another one we have to watch here in the 2026 class out of Folsom, California. Said it a million times, but just bears repeating that he is planning to take a mission trip upon graduation. So this is very much a guy that wouldn't get to the school of choice until 2027 for his debut true freshman season. So if Oregon doesn't get Jared Curtis, I think it'd be very interesting. Gets more interesting to see where they would go. Maybe Keyshawn Henderson out of Houston would be a name worth watching there. He's a guy that has really seen his stock rise this offseason. Saw him out in San Antonio for the Navy All-American Bowl, and that guy is uber talented. So I think that's kind of what we have on the quarterback front coming out of the weekend. So 20 minutes of the pod had to be dedicated to that. But let's get back to a little bit more Oregon USC on the recruiting trail, because over the weekend, and I guess really over the last week or so, it seems like there's been a little bit of smoke around Oregon D-line commit Tomuhini Topui out of Mater Dei. He's the reigning Trinity League defensive MVP. Maybe it was overall MVP, I think. He went out to USC for their junior day right before the dead period started. And his quotes have always been strong about USC. Obviously, you have the distance on their side, the hometown hero kind of effect. I know that they're trying to recruit some pretty big names along the D line, certainly with Coach Henney there. And they already have Jakeem Stewart from the 2026 class. So I think that USC, even if the on-field performance hasn't gotten where it needs to be, I think it improved a bit last year from a defensive standpoint, certainly. But their quarterback play and offense certainly limited them. So the defense is heading in the right direction, and it's not really a surprise to me, seeing that he got on campus, that USC is becoming a much more appealing option for him, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a statement win for Lincoln Riley. I mean, I know that USC fans are clamoring to the Jonas Williams flip, but I mean, again, anybody that was following recruiting saw the writing on the wall there. To me, Tomuhini Topui would be a very big feather in the cap for them. It's a position of need. It's a guy at Mater Dei. It's definitely an Oregon commit that the Ducks would love to hang on to. That would be a really big win for Lincoln Riley and a really big boost to their class. So, we both know that if there's one area that, USC needs to get a lot better at, it's at defensive line. They don't have a ton of firepower. They don't have a ton of depth. And, so a guy like this, who's a really good player, very disruptive, plays for the best program in California, would be a big win. There's certainly smoke there. There's no doubt about that. I don't know that a flip is imminent, but it's certainly on the table. It's USC is the hometown school. Like, I know they haven't been, great the last few years, but, that kind of stuff doesn't bleed out of parents. There's parents that grew up in the Pete Carroll days, obviously not recruits that are 17 years old, but parents that grew up in Pete Carroll days and, Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and all those. I mean, those were some legendary teams. I don't take that away from USC. They're a long ways removed from that, but this would certainly be a step in the right direction. So, Riley has done an extremely poor job of recruiting the state of California the last couple of years. So to go and get a guy like Tom and pull him away from Oregon, who's basically your biggest rival in the West Coast right now, it would be a statement win. Now, that said, if they do happen to pull it off, and if he does happen to flip, there is zero doubt in my mind that recruitment is done. Oregon's not going to go away lightly into the night. So I'm not saying that I guarantee he'll flip back. I'm not saying anything stupid like that. I'm just saying the saga is probably far from over, even if that does happen.
Sure. I think that's very well said. This is a guy that Oregon really coveted and wanted in their 2026 recruiting class. And I think that it stands to reason that the longevity in this recruitment from the Oregon side of things will ultimately pay off. I'm not saying that USC wasn't really recruiting him until recently, but I certainly don't think that they were putting in the effort or the resources that Oregon had. So I think the timing here favors Oregon, and you and I have both kind of dug into this one a little bit, and it seems like, that there's some smoke there, but I heard from a source this morning that the legitimacy of it may not be quite where the social media keyboard warriors think it is. So I can definitely echo your part with maybe nothing being imminent, but if you had to designate a school that's the most likely to flip Tomuhini Topui, I think it would be USC. But at this time, I don't think that it's looking terribly likely. So I know that we were talking a lot about that on the boards over the weekend, so I wanted to make sure that we hit that there latest on Tom. But anything else that you kind of wanted to hit on, Justin, while we're rolling on the Monday edition of the pod?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we had some content over the weekend. There's a lot. I think there's too many to do in one to do in 5 minutes in one show, but there's a lot of official visits being set up that you and I are reporting on and covering. I would encourage fans to go and check that out. Also, I mean, we spent a minute or two, but On3 just did its rankings update, and Oregon's offensive tackle commit Cody Green at Mater Dei saw a significant bump into the top 10 of recruiting, not just his position, but of recruiting. So really big bump and award for him. And, there was some others with some movement, some good, some bad. That's kind of the latest. I think, Cody Green, maybe possibly after quarterback, I think offensive tackle, offensive line might be the next most discussed position group by Oregon fans, by us, biggest concern. So now you look at where Cody Green is, and of course we both know, and most Oregon fans know, Oregon's definitely in the game for 5-star Jackson Cantwell and 5-star Emmanuel Ihenicho. Those guys are what number 2 and number 3 recruits nationally. So Oregon potentially 2 and 4. I was close. So I mean, you're potentially looking at Oregon having 2 top 10 offensive tackles, not by position, but by overall rankings, 2 top 10 offensive tackle commits in this class, potentially, whether it's Cody Green and Cantwell or Cody Green and Ihenicho. I don't think they'll get all 3. That's wishful thinking. That'd be pretty unreal. I just don't think it's possible. But even if you get 2, you can call that a day.
Yeah, I think that would be a phenomenal haul for Oregon, and we can't overlook the importance of hanging on to Cody Green as a top West Coast guy who continues to see his stock climb on the recruiting trail. And it seems like Oregon is battling Georgia for both Cantwell and Ihenicho right now. Maryland's also firmly in the mix there for Emmanuel, which shouldn't come as much of a surprise, right? With him being based out of Baltimore and being a Baltimore native. But there's a lot of guys here. I just made a little change on the fly. I messed up that Kendra Harrison's at 16 overall now, was previously number 13, not 3. So hopefully that gets updated there. But a couple other West Coast guys that I think are worth keeping an eye on. You got Devon Benjamin, cornerback out of Oaks Christian. He's a name that has been linked to Oregon for a long time. And I've kind of been trying to say in my reporting that I think Oregon leads there pretty significantly, but it seems like he's not in the biggest of rushes in his decision. And then Mark Bowman over at Mater Dei as well as someone that has been at the forefront of Oregon's recruiting efforts for tight end. Brandon Arrington's another top West Coast guy. He's going to take an official visit to Oregon, as is Mark Bowman. Chris Henry Jr. dropping significantly from number 8 to number 28, according to On3, but I guess that makes sense because he missed a majority of his junior year, so you just don't have as much to go off of there. But we know that he's a top target for the Ducks as well. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of recruiting right now is the quarterback dominoes that we saw over the weekend, and then official visits are starting to come into focus. So with the recruiting dead period coming to an end at the end of February, Justin and I are going to be working on getting you guys up to speed on who's expected in the month of March. But I wouldn't be surprised if things are kind of spread out until spring ball gets underway, because that's when the staff can really take advantage of having those spring practices and having a product to show them directly, which is kind of the closest thing that you have to an in-season game day visit. So that's kind of where I think we see things going here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think we'll see March have some visitors. I don't know that it'll be a ton. I think it'll be some here and there. Obviously, I think they'll utilize the weeks or weekends they can when they're having practices. Let's be real. Eugene, Oregon can be a bit sparse during a period when school's not in session. So, it's typically not the best time to bring recruits in because your team is back home, your college campus is pretty dead. It's not the best time to really showcase kind of the spirit of Eugene, Oregon. So I would imagine that there's a couple weeks there that it's kind of, but I think April will get running. Obviously you'll have more practices. You'll have the spring game. That's going to be a pretty big month for recruiting. And again, I know what you and I are talking about official visits, but what's going to cement those official visits and really, keep Oregon in the game is getting those guys on campus in March and April. Get those guys on campus in March and April. I don't care if it's for a day, half a day, whatever, just be able to shake hands with them and say hi, let them maybe see your practice. And that will really help lock in those official visits that you've either already set or that you're working on setting. So going to be some key stuff there. Lastly, we'll send it out with this, but shout out to Oregon men's basketball. That win at Wisconsin on the road, a team that's been ultimately white hot playing basketball lately. Win in overtime, Jackson Shellstad to hit that friggin' 3 at the end of the game. Like that might be one of Dana Altman's biggest wins at Oregon. That was, just kind of to pull it all together. And like you said, we're about to enter March. And what's the best thing about March? March Madness, baby. So, Duck's making a little bit of a surge here, hopefully, and maybe we'll have some basketball to talk about too.
Yeah, the thing with the Oregon basketball is that they've kind of struggled to find that consistency, but they're usually peaking at the right time under Dana Altman, and that certainly seems like the direction that this year's men's team is headed. So fingers crossed that keeps happening, and we get to see some great basketball from the Ducks. But I think that's going to do it for us here on today's pod. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. Find me anywhere at mtorresports. If you're watching here on the YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, and chat with us. Love to engage with you guys there, and share the show, share the pod anywhere you find it with anyone you can. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.